Hello everyone, I am Valentina Santini and I welcome you all to the last lecture of the second issue of our Bulletin of Near Eastern Excavations and Research. This issue, as the previous one actually, has been focused on current archaeological excavations, projects and research in the Near East and intended for the scientific community, university students, and the wider public as well. At the end of this lecture, as usual, there would be a section dedicated to questions. Therefore, if you do have questions, if you wish to learn something more about the topic of this lecture, you can use the live chat of YouTube. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to read your questions or your comments to our speakers. The title of today's lecture is Working in the Ancient State of Lagash, New Results from Recent Excavations at Zurghul, Ancient Nigin, Iraq. So please let me introduce our speakers, Davide Nadali from Sapienza, University of Rome, and Andrea Polcaro from University of Perugia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentina. Good afternoon. So thank you for the invitation, and it is a pleasure for us to present, let's say, new results that are not totally new, since because of the pandemic situation, the last season was not possible to be carried out in Iraq. But anyway, we will be happy to share with you the new information we gathered in the last season in 2019. So I will start the first part, and then Andrea will complete with the second part. So we will then switch a PowerPoint, but the archaeological expedition in Iraq is a joint expedition by the two universities, Rome and Perugia. So I start with presenting you the topographic map that, showing the in red the areas that has been excavated since 2014. So the first season started in 2014. I will deal specifically with the new results from the last season in 2019, dealing with the excavation we carried out in 3 new areas, or at least in 2 new areas, and an old area that has been reopened and reworked in 2019. The site of ancient Nigin, corresponding to the modern Tel Zurghul, is in southern Iraq, in the province of Dikar. So it's actually east from the modern city of Nasiriyah, and of course of the ancient site of Ur. And these maps show you the condition of the site at the time during the Holocene period, that in historical time correspond in fact to the mid-5th millennium BC, or according to the cultural chronology of Mesopotamia, is the Ubaid period, so the Middle Ubaid and Middle Chalcolithic period, when the site in fact was characterized by a landscape, or better to say a waterscape. You know that even today, southern Iraq, specifically in the provinces of Maizan and Anbar, is characterized by the presence of the so-called marshlands. So this peculiar landscape of southern Iraq with marshes. And once, of course, this area was much wider. And you can see here, when the ingression of the sea arrived actually northern from the site of Nigin, and the site was in fact part of this characteristic landscape of southern Mesopotamia, characterized by marshes and mostly by water. The site of Nigin was probably, as for many other sites of the same period and in the same region, one of the so-called turtleback settlements. So it means that it was a kind of island floating in the water, and the connection from one side to the other was in fact characterized by movement by boats moving in fact across this ancient shoreline, and the use later on of even artificial canals. This is a picture of one of the two mounds of the site of Tel Zurghul, that is about 70 hectares wide. It has two main mounds. This one is the minor one, is the area B, and in fact it is here that we found up to now the most ancient phase of occupation of the site, dating to the Ubaid period, so exactly to the Middle Chalcolithic period, and so exactly in the time when the site was surrounded by water. And so probably you see this specific and peculiar feature of the hill, and probably corresponding to one of the old turtleback settlement system. The presence of water is also, I would say, archaeologically documented by the findings that we collected in area B. Specifically, you see in the top left the collection of clay fishing net, weight net that were used for the fishing activities. And one of the most, I would say, characteristic object of the Ubaid period that you can see bottom on the left, the clay sickle, that is usually linked or interpreted as an instrument, a tool for agricultural activity, but we suggest that it might even be used to cut the reeds in the marshes, so for the fishing activity that were carried out in this specific environment. The presence of fish, together with, for example, you can see here the in situ picture of the finding, is also documented by, in fact, the recovery of these faunal remains of fish, that then, thanks to the analysis that have been carried out, it was possible to identify with a very specific kind of fish, a shark bull, that according to the information and the characteristic of this animal, he could live in a so-called brackish water, so a mix between water from canal and water from the sea. So this points out, in fact, the environment where the city and the ancient of settlement of the site of Tel Zurghul was. In the same area, in area B, so I just go quite quick to the old excavation we carried out before 2019, we concentrated on the top and the western southern slope of the mound, and we could identify the sequence of buildings that had been interpreted as temples. And here you can see the result of the excavation made in 2017. When we restarted the excavation in 2019, the idea was, in fact, to try to complete at least the plan of one of the phases of the temple, mostly the phase 2. And you see on top right, the red line was, in fact, the idea to enlarge the excavation and the area to the north, and to complete or trying to complete the plan of this phase. I say try, and I will explain you later on why, because we have, of course, some problems of ancient excavations that have been carried out at the end of the 19th century by the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey, who worked at Tel Zurghul for nearly 2 months before then moving north and starting his exploration of the ancient city of Babylon. As I told you, the time span of the occupation of the area B of the entire mound up to now is fixed to the Ubaid period. Here you have just a sample of the typical pottery, painted and unpainted pottery of the Ubaid period that we collected from this area. Up to now, we were able to identify 5 phases of at least 3 buildings with sub-phases that are quite difficult to detect, and I will now show you in a moment why. Because of course the structuring mud bricks are quite eroded because of the continuous occupation of the area, so the superimposition of the buildings, and because also on the slope because of the natural erosion that of course make the situation and the archaeological situation and the archaeological conservation of the structure quite difficult. This is the plan of the new excavation made in 2019, and in fact we enlarged the north and northwest the area in completing in fact the plan of the building of phase 2. But as you can see, we have exactly in the middle the excavation made by Koldevai that of course deeply affected the preservation of the mud brick structures of the old buildings. Moving to the north, as we already started to find in 2017, we were able to detect even earlier phases. So part of the buildings of phase 3 and probably even the beginning of phase 4. And we were in fact able to confirm this hypothesis in 2019 with the finding, as you can see, on the northwestern corner of the area, with the finding of the walls that in fact are underneath phase 2. Here you can see a picture taken from the northwest, and you can, I think, immediately perceive the condition not only of the preservation and the erosion. Specifically, you can see on the right, on the left of the picture, but of course the condition of preservation of these mud bricks. So we have walls of mud bricks that are quite, on one hand, I can say well preserved because we can in fact detect or recognize the bricks, but you can see that they are preserved just in 1 or at maximum 2 rows. So in fact, they are quite thin, and the preservation and the possibility to reconstruct the plan is of course quite difficult, and I would say sometimes a bit a challenge. Here you have part of the 2 floors of phase B, and specifically in fact of the sub-phases 2B, the floors of the temples or the sacred buildings, because temples in fact is suggested by the kinds of findings we collected. And you see that in fact part of this floor is cut by Koldevai's trench, so it is preserved only for a very small portion. But quite interesting, we found, as you can see on the floor, the fragments of many pottery that have been then reconstructed and partially restored, again fitting with the Ubaid cultural period of Iraq. Here I show you just some of the findings next to the pottery that are typically of the Ubaid period, the so-called clay nails or clay vessels. So it is again a matter of debate on the use and the function of those objects that you can see on the top. A fragment of a painted female terracotta figurine, and a very nice stamp seal with geometric design that again is typically of the Ubaid period of ancient Mesopotamia. Here you can see, and this is the difficult task of this area, part of the Koldevai ancient excavation made at the end of 19th century. And you see that in fact they are exactly on the top of the mound. They surely cut the ancient structures, and quite strange enough, this sounding has been refilled with fragments of baked bricks, even stones, and it is actually up to now quite difficult to understand when this action occurred. I suspect that it is impossible, or this is my opinion, and then Andrea and I have probably changed many ideas during the time, but it seems at least to me strange to think that Koldevai at the end of his excavation actually refilled the sounding with this material. So it seems to me that this action probably occurred later on, but it is really impossible to fix the time when this action exactly happened. I will show you later, in the end of my part of the presentation, some of the findings that come exactly from this feeling of this sounding that I told you are made of stone, baked bricks, and some of these bricks have an inscription. Just moving quickly to the second part of my presentation, the excavation in 2019 also concentrated on the main mound. This is the other mound of the site, the mound that according to Gudea's inscription was the one he in fact built and rebuilt and was used to host the temple of the city goddess of the ancient Nigin, so the goddess Nanshe. This mound was already partially investigated by our expedition in 2016 in an area that I now call Area D South, while in 2019 we decided to open two areas on the two opposite sides of the mound. So in Area E on the southern slope and in Area D North, exactly on the northern part and partially on the northern slope of the mound. The situation was quite interesting enough because we at a certain point confirmed the chronology of this top part of the mound that was probably in fact the rebuilding of the ruler Gudea of Lagash. We have an evidence that the temple in fact was built on the top of the mound, as Gudea himself states in his inscriptions, but we have the final, I would say, confirmation that the temple is no longer there. So the temple was totally destroyed when the Elamites entered the territory of the third dynasty of Ur, and in fact coming from the east, so from Iran, they first entered the ancient state of Lagash, and the hymn that we have for the lamentation of the destruction exactly explain that the temple of Nanshe was totally destroyed, and in fact Nanshe herself left the city. It is interesting also to point out that the name of the goddess Nanshe, in fact, at the end of the third millennium and with the beginning of the second millennium, so in the period of the Old Babylonian period, totally disappears from the cuneiform sources of that time. Here, I just show you some of the pictures of the area D North, where we again detected the parts of this quite heavy deposit of clay that was probably the one prepared by Budea's architects as the foundation of the temple that was in fact built on the top. And here you have on the northern side of the mound this, I would say, platform, but it's not, of course, the same platform that we found in 2016 that I will show you in a moment. But you can see it is a flat surface that, in fact, was probably the one used as a foundation of the building that was built upon. Evidence of the building, of the sacred buildings of the temple of the goddess Nanches, as I told you, are no longer there. We found probably part of the destruction and the debris of the layers that once were part of the building. And here you have a detail of some fragment of mud bricks with quite important amount of pottery that are now under study as to fix, in fact, the chronology of this last part of the 3rd millennium Mesopotamia. So trying to fix typology and chronology as to understand the phases of this final part of the 3rd millennium that is usually called Akkadian, post-Akkadian, Gudea, but we will try to fix and to understand if, in fact, this post-Akkadian period can be better defined. This picture shows you the condition of the platform that we found in 2016 on the southern side of the main mound. Here the platform was, in fact, much better preserved. And you see exactly on the top of this platform the same heavy deposit of clay that was in fact used as to build up the foundation of the temple that was definitely built on the top. Coming to the new finding of 2019, we decided to open on the southern slope of the mound a new area, area E. And this area is quite interesting because we found that the mound, as we thought from the beginning, and so the new excavation and the new results actually confirm our first hypothesis, is not as it is usually called a ziggurat, but it is a mound made by artificial terraces. So it is an accumulation of layers, an accumulation of debris, and it is, of course, terraced. This mud brick that you see on the background of this slide is probably part of this system of terracing, and we can even say partially of fortification of the area that was, of course, used to make the mound and to make the structure much more solid, as it was supposed to carry the building of the temple, and of course, not only of the temple, because as we know, in ancient Mesopotamia, the temple is just not the sacred building, but it is made of different other architectural elements that make a kind of mosaic of sacred buildings. So it is the temple, so the main sacred area, together with other different buildings that are devoted to either cultic and religious activity or socio-economic activities, such as even the production of food, the production of objects, and the production of other goods and features for the temple and in general for the ancient city. You can see, in fact, here that this area that was delimited by the wall, the mud brick wall on the eastern side, is characterized by the presence of different tanurs. So this ancient structure that were used, in fact, for the preparation of food, or at least for the baking of food. And here you have some details of this area that is exactly underneath the area D South that we excavated in 2016. We can actually, of course, as I told you, the study of the pottery materials is ongoing, but we can at least fix some chronological issues. We found in the debris in this area fragments, as you can see here, in situ, and then one of the fragments of a baked bricks carrying the Gudæus inscription when the ruler of Lagash reminds his building activities in building up the temple for the goddess Nanshe. Of course, the bricks are broken and they have been found out of context, exactly as, and these are two of the new clay cones we found in 2019. Many other cones, mostly in fragments, have already been collected in the past seasons. And also these clay cones are out of context. We are sure of that because we have the proof. Here you can see a picture of the moment of the discovery of a wall of the Ningirsu temple in the site of ancient Girsu by the British expedition of the British Museum, where in fact these clay cones were part of the structure of the wall. So they were inserted directly in the walls. And so since we find these clay cones out of context and in the surface, it means that the walls are no longer there. So the temple of Nanshe, as it is reported in the inscription of these objects that you can see in this slide, is no longer there. So it has been totally destroyed. I just show you some objects that we found in area E that are again not properly in context, but they come from earlier strata that we found excavating within some of the deep gullies that are excavated by the heavy rains in winter times. So here you have a fragment of, probably of a sculpture of a Kaunakes that is a typical of the early dynastic statues and sculpture, and a small, a very small fragment of a cylinder seal showing a female seated figure, probably in a typical scene of the early dynastic iconography, that is a banquet scene. Here, of course, is the well-known cylinder seal of Queen Wabi from the royal cemetery of Ur. You see that we can, in fact, reconstruct even the seal we found as a seal with two registers, because the female figure is seated and underneath you can recognize two horizontal lines that probably is the separation from the register on the top from the register on the bottom. So unfortunately, we found only a very small fragment. Together, before passing to what Andrea will show you specifically of the 3rd millennium BC, we know from Tel Zurghul, ancient Nigin, we have in fact other evidence of 3rd millennium materials discovered in 2019. And these objects, so the fragment of a limestone plaque, and these fragments of baked bricks come exactly from the sounding of Koldevai in area B. So they are part of the feeling that I told you, this strange feeling that if it was made by Koldevai, I really would like much to have a time machine to try to speak with Koldevai and to understand why he did this action in refilling his sounding. I suspect, as I told you, that it is not a cold device choice, and it was probably made later on. I don't know exactly when. And unfortunately, I think that these materials probably come from, in fact, early dynastic buildings that have been probably partially, if not, I hope not totally, but partially, of course, affected by this action of destruction. Quite interesting, these bricks that, according to Lorenzo Verderame, who is the philologist and the epigraphist working with us in Iraq, they even might be part of the same brick, or at least for sure of the same inscription. And he was able to read and to interpret the inscription, reconstructing the name of Enmetena, that is one of the rulers of the first dynasty of the ancient city of Lagash. And Metena was the son of Enannatum, and in this inscription he recalls the construction of the Giguna Mach, so this lofty Giguna for the goddess Nanshe. We know from other inscriptions of the first dynasty of Lagash that the Giguna was in fact a building dedicated to the goddess Nanshe, but also to other goddesses and gods of the ancient state of Lagash. And we might think, and I think the hypothesis should be correct, that in fact this Giguna was part of the sacred precinct and the sacred building of the goddess Nanshe. As I told you, according to the Mesopotamian tradition of religious architecture, temples are not only the main sacred building, but we should in fact encompass larger structures and a larger system and more complex system of different buildings with the main temple and many other sacred, or we can even say unsacred structure that were used for different purposes, such as in fact the Giguna that is quoted in these fragments of early dynastic baked bricks, again unfortunately out of context. I hope that this is not the sign as the Budea's cones, that since we found them out of context or in the on the surface, that the buildings are no longer there. So if this pandemic situation will, I don't know if end, or hopefully, of course, it will end in one day, but if we will be able to restart our exploration in later 2021, we hope that we can in fact start the new project that we wanted to start exactly last year when it was impossible to go to Iraq, to open in the so-called lower city of the settlement, and probably detecting part, or hopefully part of the sites and part of the settlement that can be in fact properly early dynastic, and so 3rd millennium BC. So I close my part and I stop sharing as to leave the floor to Andrea for his second part. Thank you.
Thank you, Davide. So, moment I share your screen. Okay, as my colleagues Davide told you before, our joint expedition between in Nigin in southern Iraq in 2014. In particular, I will speak to this evening about a specific area of our expedition, that is Area A. Area A is located on the southern side of the Mound A. You already saw in the Davide presentation, at the base of the slope. In this area, a large chronology from the late Uruk period till the early dynastic one was discovered. The area, this is the Mound A on the southern slope before the excavation started. As noted by Davide before, was full on the surface of attestation of bricks of Neo-Sumerian period, in particular of Gudea period. But at first look on the surface, thanks to some natural water channel that the heavy rains, the winter heavy rains, excavate on the ground, we will able to see some bricks, gypsum bricks and beveled rim bolts exposing late Uruk period structure. Here, so we decide to open a large open area that at the end was very huge. The excavation was performed in season 2015, 2016, and 2017 with the collaboration and supervision of our colleagues. The area was characterized by a huge structure, a building that was continually used from the late Uruk period till the early dynastic, with the superimposing layers one on the top of the other. The building that we call the building A was only partially excavated, so we will expose at least 4 rooms inside the building and a huge open area or open courtyard in front of the building on his southwestern side. The archaeological layers exposed in this area clearly points to distinguish at least 7 phases of use of the building. The first phase is dated to the late Uruk period. Then there is a second phase that could be considered the transitional between late Uruk and Gemna Nasr period. A third phase of the Gemna Nasr, and a fourth phase of the Gemna Nasr period, and then the phases 5, 6, and 7 that could be reasonably be dated from the pottery to the early, at least the beginning of the early dynastic one. You can see on the left the matrix of the excavation area. We will start with the phase 1 that is dated to the late Uruk period. It was the first exposed, thanks, as I told you, thanks to this natural water channel excavated by the rain in the ground, and was characterized by a small room made by a wall of mud bricks and gypsum bricks that are atypical architectonical characteristics of the late Uruk period that will disappear further later already in the Gemna Nasr period. Inside this room, this was the diagnostic pottery like beveled rim bowls or droop-spouted jars that clearly points to the late Uruk period phase. Inside the room, we discovered several conical bowls upside down, probably folded from wooden shelters that was identified in the excavation layer. these conical balls was sometimes piled one on the top of the other in the original position, sometimes isolated and full of some food remains, clearly identified in some of the conical balls. Unfortunately, the samples of the 2015, when this first phase was discovered, was not possible. We are not able to take it back in Italy for analysis. So we started to analyze only the samples, as I will show you, organic samples that we discovered inside the excavation layers in the 2016 and 17 campaign. This is the second phase of the building. In this, of course, the later phases are more preserved, going on the slope, in proximity of the slope of Mound A. This could indicate that the late, as Davide showed you before, for the characteristic of Mound A, the oldest architectural structure of the late Uric and German Naz period of the center part of the building could probably are buried under the later structure consisting in the core of Mound A. In the phase 2, the building have this clear difference with an external area, courtyard L12, and a first 2 rooms inside the building that you can see on the map and on the picture down on the right. The characteristic of the external, these are some pottery with the mixed pottery, in particular some cannon spouted jars pointed to a transitional phase to the German Naz period. The external, very interesting feature is that the external courtyard was used clearly for, we discovered several installations used for food production, as such as on the right you can see a tannoor, a typical clay tannoor, T109, and some fireplaces of different dimension discovered close to the courtyard. So we have at least 2 open areas in front of the building used for cooking food. The different typology of the oven and the fireplace, of the tannoor oven and the fireplace, will suggest a different kind of cooking in the courtyard, in particular roasting for the ovens and boiling, because the fireplaces are possibly used to cook through water foods on the top with the simply technology. The 2 different typology of cooking suggest production of different kind of foods. It was very interesting to analyze the samples coming from this area that are actually continued to be analyzed by a team of our botanic colleagues from Naples Federico II University, Gaetano Di Pasquale. In particular, we started to identify the several remains of seed undressed of emmer mostly, and also barley. in different layers, filling also the inner side of the tannour. The use of this kind of grains, emmer and barley, is widely attested in the cuneiform source for the Sumerian, for all the Sumerian history, but for sure till the late Uric period is well known for the production mostly of breads and of the main drink of the Sumerian culture, beer, but also used for soups of different kind, in particular emmer, that is very suitable for soups and not much suitable for making bread. Another very interesting discovery of the botanics that are studying the samples coming from the courtyard of phase 2 of building A is the discovering of some carbon remains inside the fireplaces of Alnus plant. This is a plant typical of marshland and of water landscape geological typologies, and was probably a plant common in the landscape of Nigin, at least in this at the end of the 4th millennium BC. So this means that as such as for the Ubaid period, the landscape of Nigin continued to be characterized by water presence. This was the wood that was used to make fire inside the fireplaces that we saw before. This is the third phase. We are now, third and fourth phases, we are now completely inside the Gemnen-Nas period. This is clearly indicated from the materials, pottery materials found inside the building. The building had now the differentiation of two small rooms on the northern wing, and on the southern wing of the structure, it remains characterized by a single open court, inner court, L131. A characteristic of the Gemnen phase, very important, is that the external courtyard in front of the building continued to be used for food production activities of different kinds of typologies. In particular, in these phases, we discovered a rectangular oven, also in clay, that was probably used continuously for a lot of time, also for cooking some kind of foods. Very interesting is the discovering around this oven of lentils remains. Lentils was one of the most ancient legumes domesticated by man in the ancient Near East, already in the Neolithic period. Moreover, we know from the Mesopotamian texts from the later period that this was one of the most suitable legumes cultivated but also consumed in Mesopotamia. Is very nice, these discoveries, if you think that the lentils is still today in the Arabian culture considered one of the most suitable legumes, in particular for soups, as such as the famous shorba soups that you can find in many countries of the ancient Near East. So it is possible that also soups of legumes, in particular of lentils, was cooked in this part of the courtyard in this phase. Also, other kind of seeds were discovered by the botanics equipes inside the samples from this rectangular oven. In particular, again, the two main grains of the southern Mesopotamia, emmer and barley. These grains in particular was discovered undressed and carbonized. This could indicate also the preparation of the seeds for their grinding in the case of making bread, or other kind of activities in the case of the use for making beer in particular. In the same phases of the Gemna period, inside, in this case, the building, we discovered a lot of smashed jars, clearly painted, that was scattered on the floor between the small rooms of the northern wing and the main inner court. The jars was painted jars typically of the Gemna period, with painting in red and black, and was discovered also fragments of 4-ledged jars, red painted also, as you can see down in the picture down. The decoration, the shapes, the pottery shapes, and the typology of decoration for sure points to date these phases inside the Gemna period. The decoration of these jars, in fact, are mostly of geometric designs, with a lot of comparison with Gemna pottery in all the Mesopotamian area, and simple also, perhaps some figurative motifs, but mostly geometrical ones. Together with this pottery continues to be present a lot of conical bowls. That is not strange, because it's a shapes that continues from the end of the late Uric period till the beginning of early dynastic, even if the typology of the conical bowls will slightly change in this period, in particular the thin of the side of the bowl. A part of the chronological issues is interesting, the continuing of the discovering of conical bowls, because these are typically bowls used for the redistribution of foods. This means that this building that was connected in some way with the preparation of a lot of quantities of different kind of foods was also continued to be used in both the late Uric and the Gemna period, also as a building to storing and giving back to the population final food product through this kind of vessels. This perhaps is the reason why in the first phase we found also some of these vessels scattered with inside food remains. A typology of goblet that starts to appear in this phase, as you can see high on the right, is the solid footed goblet that starts now and continues in the later phase. A very interesting discovery inside the building A in the phase of Gemna period, together in the main inner courtyard, together with the smashed painted jars, is this small bull figurine, probably in diorite, but it's not sure because we are not performed already kind of specific analysis on the stone. That is in any case a dark black lucid stone. Is an object that is not pierced, so is probably not used for a necklace, but was a figurine in stone, so in any case a precious object that had difficult in general comparison because of the rare figurine discovered in Gemna period. In any case, the presence of a figurine in a room that was used for stored food eventually is a possible connection also with the sacred activities connected with the redistribution of food in the Sumerian period. even if, of course, is not approved, but could be an indication that this building, these rooms of this building A, could be part of a larger complex that includes also part of buildings dedicated to the cult and so of a religious nature. And this could perhaps also explain the proximity of the building with the future Sirara temple that Davide showed you before. The later phase identified in the larger open area trench of area A is dated to the early dynastic, very beginning of the early dynastic one, phase 5. This was an interesting transformation of part of the northern wing of the structure that was used also for the production of foods. So in this period, change the function of at least a part of the building inside. Outside, it continues to be used for the food production, probably, but we don't know because the upper layer in the southern part of the trench are not preserved. But in any case, in the very beginning of early dynastic one, also the inner rooms of the building start to be used for production food of some sort. In this case, unfortunately, till now, it's very difficult to say what kind of food. We can try to advance some hypotheses. Concerning the main food production installation, called E400 basin, plastered with connected with the two small circular installation, one of which you can see in the upper picture on the right was discovered full of ash and very black layers, probably indicating his function as a small oven for heating. Heating what? Probably the organic materials that was located inside the basin. If you put a liquid in the basin, probably the small oven can heat the liquid without boiling the liquid itself. This kind of hypothesis, first of all, the very interesting things is the carbons that were analyzed inside the small oven connected to the installation. The carbons pertains again to two different plant species, the prunus and the tamarix, and both are plants very common in water landscapes connected to lakes, rivers, and marshland areas. It's probably that also in this period, as in the late Uric period and in Gems and Nasr, the landscape of Nigis continues to be characterized by water, but possibly a water landscape, but possibly a more organized or more urbanized landscape with plants also domesticated and grows to shape the vegetal landscape together with the evolution of the agriculture and the canalization techniques. Of course, also this must be verified in the future with the continuation of the analysis of the samples of carbons coming from all the site of Nigin, we hope in the future. One of the hypotheses that I can told you, of course, is just a speculative hypothesis and based on the shape of the installation that I showed you before, could be hypothesized that this installation is part of the process of making beer. Beer, as you know, was linked in the Sumerian cultures to the goddess Ninkasi. There is a hymn of the goddess Ninkasi of the Old Babylonian period, quoting the preparation of beer, but is a lot discussed by Assyriologists. And in any case, is not of the same period of our installation, that speaks about the possibility of the use of heating without boiling of some of the parts of the beer process, making process, like the bappir, for example, or the titub. Moreover, there are, but quite far from our site, in the same second millennium BCE, the same period of the Ninkasi hymn, installation in the island of Cyprus, in the site of Kissonerga Scalia, that was identified as basin, plastered basin, heated, used for the preparation of the beer, and in particular of the fermented mash of the beer. This, of course, I repeat, is just an hypothesis, because unfortunately, till now, we didn't discover clearly remains of any kinds from the earth samples that comes from the Ova basin. An interesting installation close to this basin was in the smaller room just located west of the first, and is a simple pit excavated in the floor of the room that was covered by pottery shards. Inside this fire installation that we call T420, a lot of carbons, small ashes, has been identified, and now while I'm talking to you, also these samples are now under the analysis of the botanists, so we hope to have more information also about the use of these two kind of installation that are inside the building and not outside, like the other food production installation I showed you before. But this oven, this small pit in the room, give to us the first C14 date of Tel Zurghul Nigin. So at any case, it was good discoveries. In particular, considering the calibrated, more probably date, we are in fact between the 3000 and 2800 BC, as quoted by the Pottery, between the passage, the end of the Geomorphological, the very early beginning of the early dynastic one period. And this is phase 5. In this phase, also, this was an interesting discoveries. A lot of small parts of bitumen, perhaps sealing systems that present traces and sign of ropes used perhaps to close the sealing of jars or something like that. But also this kind of discoveries are till now not analyzed in detail, but probably are part of the closing system also of jars and of the vessels used for storing food and products inside the building. The sixth phase is dated to the early dynastic one, was discovered just on the top of the rooms that I showed you before, and was preserved just in very, very small part. In any case, conical bolts continues to be present, also is very thin now compared to the older one, and also solid-footed goblets. I end with phase 7, that is still early dynastic one, was discovered very few in just a corner, as you can see in the picture of the northeastern part of the trench, just close to the slope, southern slope of Mound A. So concluding, the building A was surely a multifunctional building used for at least producing, storing and redistributing food at the population of Nigin between the late Uruk period at least till the early dynastic I period. The building is not completely excavated and is very probably that it is a huge building that goes also down the later phase of Mound A in the northern part of the trench. And I will give back the word to my colleagues Davide Nadali to close our presentation. If I will be able to, okay, stop sharing.
Okay, I think that we close with just a very few remarks as you showed that the site, at least for the moment, has I would say 3 main phases with several sub-phases. We have to confess, Andrea, that our first idea when we started the excavation in Iraq, we wanted an early dynastic period site. So this was our main idea according to an old project that we carried out together. And it was quite surprising when we started excavating that we had, in fact, a quite well-preserved phase of occupation to the Ubaid period, quite on the surface. And the early dynastic is still missing. So we have, as I showed you, fragments of statues, sculptures, cylinder seals, bricks. We have a quite not bad amount of early dynastic pottery, started also, as Andrea showed you, from the excavation of area A, but we can still say that the early dynastic is missing. So the main task would be to investigate, in fact, the 3rd millennium settlement of ancient Nigin, as try to also link the historical information from the cuneiform sources of the rulers of the 1st dynasty of Lagash that we know were very busy in Nigin, so in building the sacred temple for the goddess Nanshe, in providing with other structures, the construction of canals that were actually were crossing the ancient city and linking the 3 main cities of the ancient state of Lagash. So from the north, Ningirsu, Lagash al-Hibba, and Nigin tel Zurghul, actually reaching probably again a missing site, that is the site of Guabba, that was in fact the harbor of the ancient state of Lagash. So we think that we have a lot to do in our site, and probably not only concentrating on the site, but even looking at least more or a bit far from the site, so in the landscape surrounding the site of Tel Zurghul. We are luckily working together with the American expedition that started exactly in 2019, the reworking in Al-Hibba Lagash, and with the British expedition in Ningirsu. So this is a very special situation where we have the 3 main sites of the ancient state of Lagash under excavation, and we will be able, we hope, to link the information and to, in fact, write, or we can even somehow suggest rewrite the ancient history of the state of Lagash. So thank you very much for your attention. And as Valentina said in the beginning, if you have any question or comments, remarks, or whatever, we are happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a really, really interesting and stimulating, and I really hope it would produce some questions in the live chat. And in fact, we have one question written by Giorgio Buccellati, Giorgio and Marilyn, actually. Congratulations. And a quick question. Do you know where virgin soil is and difference in elevation with respect to the clay terracing in B or the structures in A?
We don't. No, we can only say one thing. In 2017, sorry, in the season 2017, we carried out some I forgot the name now. Not excavation, but some soundings. To recover in the lower city, in different spots of the lower city of Zurghul, actually not so far the archaeological stratigraphy and the archaeological evidence, but it was aimed at identifying the geological sequences of the different strata of the settlement, as to rebuild, in fact, the ancient environment of the marshes. We could not reach, I would say, a virgin soil. We have, I would say, geological soil that, in fact, from an archaeological point of view, could be considered virgin, as it has not any anthropic evidence inside. And this was reached at a depth of 6 meters, at least in the western and southeastern part of the site.
Thank you so much. Of course, and I'm talking to our public. If you have other questions, please use the live chat and I will read your comments. So in the meantime, I would like to ask you something. Did you find human inhumations, human tombs in the settlement?
Andrea, it is your field of research. So
no, unfortunately, till now we didn't discover any burial grounds. We have some suspicions about possibility of burial areas on the close of the limits, northwestern limits to the settlement, but probably there was production areas close, almost outside the city, and there could be signs of burials, but till now we did not perform an extended excavation in that part of the site. And in the other mounds, no single human bones remain was discovered.
Thank you, really interesting. Thank you. A new question. Stefano Valentini asks, well, thank you for your presentation, first of all. Are you planning to dig under the Nanshin temple platform to see if there's an older temple underneath? And are there any reports of a Calderway excavation?
Thank you for the question, Stefano. Yes, we are planning exactly this. So I didn't show you, but we already started on the northern side of Mound D, or Mound A in area D North, to in fact going underneath the platform. We are still, however, in this quite thick layer of clay mostly with some pottery fragments, but very scanty, in fact. That probably is the part of the rebuilding of the mound made by Gudea, because Gudea, in his inscription, he says that he built the temple, but he rebuilt the entire area as to make it as a mountain above the water. So this is a quite interesting description that again shows how the ancient city was still characterized by a waterscape. We know for sure, and this is confirmed at least by the cuneiform inscription of the rulers of the first dynasty of Lagash, that since the time of Urnanche of Lagash, there was a temple dedicated to Nanche. So for sure, we have evidence of at least early dynastic temples. Now, the point is, if we have also the archaeological evidence. I hope that Gudea, as it was typical in the Mesopotamian tradition, of course, did not destroy the ancient temple, but he just sealed the temple, building up a new one. So we hope that in fact, underneath, we have the evidence of earlier phases of the temple.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, the Koldevai, yes, there is only one report published by Koldevai in Zeitschrift für Assyriologie, the issue 2 of 1887. But it is, I would say, very nice, but totally useless.
Thank you. We have another question, this time from Nicola Laneri. Are you planning a survey to further investigate the harbor?
Okay, so I would say yes, and at the same time, inshallah. So if I say yes and inshallah because for the moment, the permission we got from the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage of Baghdad is just for the site. So we didn't ask for any survey in the area, but in fact, it seems quite logical to do that. Abdulhamir Hamdani, who is the archaeologist of Nasiriyah and carried out a quite extensive survey in the area of the Dikar and other southern regions of Iraq, has an opinion, of course, where Guabba could be. It should not be so far, in fact, from Nigin. The point is that according to some people, it is exactly directly to the south. Others think that it is mostly to the southwest. So it is, in fact, a matter of debate, but as Nicola said, probably only a survey in the area can definitely, if not explain and find a reason, at least to point to a direction in the research.
Of course, thank you. Another question. Good evening and thank you for your presentation. My question is, do you think you'll proceed to any geophysical analysis to better understand late Uric building structure and function? Thank you.
Andrea,
yes, we for sure we foresee this kind of analysis. Till now, we didn't made it for the difficulties also to carry on some heavy instruments in Iraq. Also is very difficult to use, for example, technologies with drones like LiDAR. So we will now are thinking the best way to as, for example, georadar or geoelectrical to investigate the surface. I don't know, Davide, if you want to say something. Probably Sapienza teams that have also this kind of...
We, in fact, actually, the idea was to try to do it in last year. So when the main idea was to leave for the season, we had a contact with the National Research Center of Rome, that they are specialized in this kind of research. We contacted them via the geologist of my university, and they suggested that was, as Andrea just was telling you, the geoelectrical instead of the geomagnetical prospecting could be much more useful for the kind of soil and the nature of the site. Unfortunately, then last year we could not leave for the season, and as in fact Andrea told you, the other difficult task is to move people, or I can say to organize people coming and arriving at a different period in Iraq, because asking for visa and permission is not quite an easy task. And so we should, in fact, start with a fixed group and a fixed equipe and moving all together. If then a part of the equipe reaches us later on and comes back earlier, starts to be a quite organization of the for us. So it true. Okay.
Yes, I think all the expedition in general in the Near East have this kind of problem in general. Transportation on heavy instruments is always an issue.
Yeah, problematic. Yeah. Great. So I'm looking at the chat and I can't see any more questions. So yeah, any more questions? I really would like to thank you once more for your lecture. Thank you so much. And thank, of course, to our public as well. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of this encounter, this was the last lecture of the second issue of our bulletin. However, of course, if you have missed our previous lectures or if you want to rewatch them, why not? You can find them here on YouTube on the CAMNES channel. So again, thank you so much for being with us. And we really hope you enjoyed this lecture of the bulletin. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.